So, unless you've been living under a rock for the past several years, you've probably heard of this little thing called isekai, and just as likely have watched at least one such show. Now, despite how inundated the industry is and has been with isekai, I personally don't really care for isekai all that much, or at the very least, I've just gotten burnt out on it. What can I say? I feel like when it comes to isekai, most shows from that genre often leave a bad taste in my mouth. Isekai is an oversaturated genre, and most of the shows are a ripoff of a ripoff of a ripoff. But occasionally, there is an isekai that catches my eye. An isekai that has such an original idea that I have to give it a try. Mushoku Tensei, or Jobless Reincarnate, was not that isekai. However, something about this anime drew me in anyways. Maybe it was the art or the fact that the premise seemed so simple. But for some reason, I knew I had to give Jobless Reincarnate a chance. And I am so glad I did. So first, let's talk about Jobless Reincarnate for a bit. The show follows Rudius, a 34-year-old NEET who got hit by a truck and was reincarnated as a baby. The new world he lives in is basically your standard fantasy setting. Rudius ends up being a magical prodigy, and the show is primarily about him growing up in this new world. And that's kind of it. About as cookie cutter as an isekai can get. But despite this simple premise, the show is incredible. It's like no other isekai I've watched for one simple reason: depth. So, a little history about Jobless Reincarnate. It was far from one of the first isekai to ever come around, but in a way, it inspired many of the more recent isekai we've come to know. You see, Jobless Reincarnate was an extremely popular internet web novel before being turned into a light novel and eventually an anime. The story was one of the most popular on Soyetsu and was even ranked the #1 most popular for several years uninterrupted. Jobless Reincarnate was one of the first isekai with Truck-kun and surviving in a new world. So ironically enough, these ideas aren't ripoffs from an older show, but new ideas for the time that are properly explored and that make all the difference in the world. The first episode is your standard isekai intro episode. Rudius wakes up, puts two and two together, and finds out that he has been reincarnated into another world, and slowly figures out how to read and write and use magic. But the second episode is a bit different. You see, in Rudius's past life, he was a NEET, who of course absolutely refused to leave the house. Every time he gets near the front gate in his new life, he's struck with panic attacks and flashbacks of how horribly he was tormented by everyone around him in his past life, which is what made him a NEET to begin with. It's only after his sensei gives Rudius a helping hand and brings him outside that he's able to truly overcome the trauma of his past life and accept that he is living in a new world. It's a fully developed character arc Rudius must go on to not waste away like he did in his previous life. He carries many of the same fears, but now he is inspired and determined to make the most of this second chance at life he's been given. So after finally getting over his fears that he brought over from his previous life, the show takes it another step. Now there's new things he'll have to fear in this new world. And the most prominent one is death. It's no surprise that in this medieval world of swords and magic, death is a much more common occurrence. In episode 4, Rudius has a near-death experience. He's almost killed by some kidnappers and is saved by a sword user. But at the same time, he watches that sword user decapitate the other person right in front of him. In most isekai, I feel like those kinds of deaths are overlooked. I mean, this character had no name and was just introduced this episode. So I feel like in most isekai, his death would have been nothing. But Rudius is scarred by this. You see genuine fear cross his eyes as he realizes that this fantasy world isn't just a game. People die, and if he had just waited a second longer, he would have died as well. After this scene, you begin to see that Rudius has a bit of a genuine fear towards the swordswoman for being able to kill so easily and not have it weigh on her mind in the slightest. This is a great exploration of what death means and how lightly we take it in anime. Rudius is a more accurate representation of how people like us would actually react in a situation like that. Most modern day humans aren't used to seeing someone get their head cut off right in front of them. Another feature of this show that wrote me in is the characters, especially the side characters, which is almost unheard of for any isekai that's come out recently. Rudius himself is great, but his mother and father are also very unique and charming characters. At first they seem like idealistic characters, but the more you learn about them, the more you realize that they aren't perfect. Case in point, Rudius's father, Paul. His father is known for being a bit unfaithful. From what the show has told us, Paul was a bit of a playboy. He slept around a lot, and not to mention, he knocked up their maid. Another one of my favorite characters is Rudius's magic teacher, Roxy. Besides being a well-realized character with a lot of funny moments, she had what was to me one of the most incredible arcs for any isekai side character I've seen. After Roxy gets surpassed by Rudius, she leaves town the next day and is inspired to go on her own independent journey to get stronger and grow as a person on her own. Is it simple? Yeah, but it proves a crucial point that's been lacking in almost any isekai to come out recently. Each of the side characters in the show are far from one-dimensional plot devices whose entire existence revolves solely around the protagonist. Each character is their own fully realized individual that has their own life to live with their own goals, desires, and motivations. And the same can be said for just about every character in the show, including Rudius himself. I think my favorite part about Rudius is that he is far from the perfect child he displays himself as. He's a pervert, obviously, but he also sucks at sword fighting and is really bad at reading situations, which makes total sense as these are things he probably would have sucked at in his previous life. Even his magic skills that he thought were legendary at first were matched quite quickly by his childhood friend that he mentored. Now, was this show the first to create these ideas that would eventually devolve into worn out and overused tropes? No, of course not. However, this show is the first isekai I've seen use all of these ideas and actually properly examine them, giving these ideas the depth they deserve because isekai on its own can be incredible. I have to admit, I never thought that these tropes could be so properly explored, and now I understand why just about every isekai pulls from them. But it's clear that Jobless Reincarnate is the best at what it does because it takes these ideas seriously. It's not a stolen idea that's been diluted 10 times over from different shows to the point where the original idea has lost all meaning. Jobless Reincarnate is the real deal. It's rare that a show is so good that I find myself checking how much longer I have left in the episode because I just don't want it to end. Jobless Reincarnate, or Mushoku Tensei, is definitely Isekai's senpai. Thank you for watching. Now, I know this show isn't exactly the most popular anime of the season, but I had to talk about Jobless Reincarnate. I have been in love with this show ever since I started watching it, and I knew I needed to talk about it, so that is why I decided to talk about it today. The Discord is live. If you guys want to come join us, the Discord link will be down in the description. Either way, here's thanking my patrons. You guys are my heroes. Please make sure you guys share, like, comment, and subscribe. This is Manime Matt. Make sure you guys stay man and go watch that goddamn anime.